Hi, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. This week, we look at how mass tourism is threatening the region's natural beauty and some of its famous hotspots. A high number of tourists is said to be completely overwhelming the coasts, and it's not helped by new holiday homes and Airbnb summer rentals. This is perhaps felt even more on the popular Greek island of Mykonos, which draws millions of visitors each year. Worried locals say they can no longer recognize the island as more and more unplanned construction sites are popping up and are calling for something to be done as soon as possible. The Greek government says it will address the problem, and many hope it will have an impact. Fay Doulgeri has more from Mykonos.
Mykonos is the strongest brand name in Greek tourism and a leading luxury destination that attracts mainly high-income travelers. This year, the Island of the Winds expects 857 cruise ships, a number that's even higher than Piraeus, the biggest port in Greece. This is very good news for the Greek economy and for businesses. Many locals, though, see things differently. Like Dimitris Koutsoukos, who was born and raised in Mykonos. Dimitris lived in California for 34 years, but now he's back permanently, and he says he's afraid that the island is losing its special color.
Η Μύκονο ήταν και είναι ένα από τα πιο όμορφα μέρη του κόσμου, νησιά ακόμα. Εμένα με πειράζει πάρα πολύ ότι γίνεται μια πολύ γρήγορη ανάπτυξη δίχως σχέδιο, δίχως υποδομές. Θέλουμε τουρισμό, αλλά δεν κάνουμε τίποτα για υποδομές. Και αυτή η ανάπτυξη δεν κάνει και καλό στον κάτοικο της Mykonos, τη στιγμή που δεν μπορεί να πάει σε παραλίες, είναι πανάκριβα, δύσκολα, δεν υπάρχει πάρκινγκ και όλα είναι πιο ακριβά και τα εστιατόρια. Και άρα δεν είναι, αυτή η ανάπτυξη είναι πιο πολύ για τους ξένους που επενδύουν εδώ. Για μένα η Mykonos έχει καταντήσει σαν το Wall Street. Έρχονται, επενδύουν, να ανεβούν οι τιμές και να τα πωλήσουν και να πάνε αλλού.
Dimitris is also concerned about the illegal construction. He says it's common for someone to have a license to build a 200 square meter house but end up constructing something much bigger, preferring to pay the fine if he's given any.
Εμένα με στεναχωράει πάρα πολύ η αδιαφορία του Μυκονιάτη και η αδιαφορία για την αισθητική του νησιού μας και ειδικά της χώρας, ενώ υπάρχουν προεδρικά διατάγματα για όλα, για τα χρώματα, για τα πάντα, δεν τα τηρούν, ούτε ο Δήμος τα τηράει, ούτε οι ίδιοι κατοίκοι.
Many local residents here in Mykonos say that immediate action needs to be taken to protect the natural beauty of the island, but for them the problem is clear. Many companies are failing to follow laws and regulations that are already in place.
Anna Micheli was also born and raised here. She says the island has changed drastically in the past few decades and that she can no longer live in her house during the tourist season, as it lies right in the middle of the island's vibrant nightlife strip.
Το χειμώνα εδώ, στο σπίτι μου, που είναι πάρα πολύ ωραία, είναι ησυχία, είναι στην πόλη μέσα, πάω στην εκκλησία, πάω στο γυαλό. Φεύγω μετά το Πάσχα, γιατί εδώ στο δρόμο αυτόν έχω τουλάχιστον 7 μπαρ. Πρέπει να είμαι συνέχεια στο τηλέφωνο όλη τη νύχτα στην αστυνομία, να παίρνω να τους λέω το ένα, κλείστε το άλλο. Δεν γίνονται αυτά τα πράγματα, δεν. Και φεύγω και πάω, έχω χτίσει ένα σπίτι στον Πλατή Γυαλό, που είχε από τον παππού μου μια περιουσία και μένω εκεί.
Anna says many Mykonians have the same problem, and this is why the capital no longer has permanent residents.
Μα ποιος δεν θέλει το φίλο και τον άνθρωπο που θα έρθει να δει και να ευχαριστηθεί? Γιατί να μην τους θέλουμε? Αλλά πρέπει να υπάρχουν κανόνες. Πρέπει να υπάρχουν κανόνες και στα αυτοκίνητα, control. Δηλαδή μπήκαν τόσες χιλιάδες αυτοκίνητα, δεν πρέπει κάτι να γίνει? Χρειάζεται αστυνομία, χρειάζεται να κάνουν κανόνες για το θόρυβο, χρειάζεται να κάνουν ένα σχέδιο για την πόλη. Τι θέλουν την πόλη, είναι μπάρ η πόλη. Δηλαδή δεν υπάρχει πόλη της Μυκόνου. Ο κόσμος έχει φύγει. Αλλά είναι και άνθρωποι που θέλουν να γυρίσουν, να μείνουν στο σπίτι τους. Αλλά δεν μπορούν.
Mykonos is one of Greece's most popular tourist destinations, but 2 years of COVID-19 kept most visitors away. That's changing now. Just 3 months into the tourism season, the area has already topped the record number of arrivals set back in 2019, but those increasing numbers are putting the island's infrastructure to the test.
During the pandemic, most of the tourists were Greek. It was their chance to visit an island that is usually off limits for them because it is very expensive. But this year, foreign tourists have returned. The famous pedestrian maze of narrow streets with cubic whitewashed houses is already very crowded, even on weekdays. Finding a parking spot is hard, and traffic jams along the roads that connect the port with the beaches in the south are quite common. Mayor Konstantinos Koukas says the island is under the strain.
Σίγουρα είναι ένα μικρό νησί, ένας βράχος γρανιτένιος στην καρδιά του Αιγαίου. Όταν έχετε πάρα πολλοί κόσμος, υπάρχει και κίνηση στο δρόμο. Σίγουρα τα δίκτυα ίδρευσης και αποχέτευσης δοκιμάζονται. Επειδή το νησί ταυτόχρονα έχει και πάρα πολύ μεγάλη αναπτυξιακή πορεία, διαρκώς ανοιγείρονται νέα ξενοδοχεία, νέα σπίτια και εκεί προσπαθούμε να ανταποκρινόμαστε στο να συνεχίζουν οι υποδομές να φτιάχνονται.
As the demand increases, so do investments in new hotel and residences. Mykonos is full of construction sites, especially on the south side, where the most popular beaches are located.
Αυτό σημαίνει ότι διαρκώς θα πρέπει να έχουμε αφαλατώσεις, διαρκώς να επεκτείνουμε τα δίκτυα, το ίδιο και στην αποχέτευση, το ίδιο ακόμα αν θέλετε και στους δρόμους. Γιατί τα νησιά δέχονται συνεχώς, τρέχουν με ρυθμούς φωτός, με ταχύτητα φωτός η ανάπτυξή τους, η επενδυτική, την ίδια στιγμή που οι υποδομές κινούνται με όρους δημοσίου.
The Greek government has acknowledged the problem. It recently commissioned a study on managing excessive tourism that recommends significant changes for Mykonos, from the number and timing of tourists to a series of initiatives and investments in infrastructure. Alongside Santorini and a region in Crete, Athens is also preparing a new special urban plan for the island. The mayor says it's to ensure that Mykonos has a viable future.
Είναι μια μελέτη η οποία θα καταλήξει στο ποιοι θα είναι οι κανόνες και πώς θέλουμε το νησί μας τα επόμενα 20-30 χρόνια. Το συμβόλαιό μας με το αύριο της Μυκόνου. Εκεί θα γίνει καταγραφή το τι υπάρχει, η υφιστάμενη κατάσταση, η φέρουσα ικανότητα, οι υποδομές και θα αποτυπωθεί η ανάγκη σε νέες υποδομές, πού θα χτίζουμε, πού δεν θα χτίζουμε, αν οι οικισμοί θα μεγαλώσουν, αν οι οικισμοί θα παραμείνουν ως έχουν, αν θα γίνουν κάποιες μεγάλες στρατηγικές επενδύσεις, αν θα γίνει κάποιο νέο λιμάνι, αν θα γίνει κάποια νέα μαρίνα. Θα είναι το συμβόλαιό μας με το αύριο.
Meanwhile, the government has stopped handing licenses for new hotel units until the urban plan is completed. Almost every global destination is now prioritizing sustainability, and studies suggest that green practices can also be profitable. And as Mykonos heads towards that direction, locals hope that the island's tourism sector can also get on board. Fay Doulgeri, TRT World, Mykonos, Greece.
Can sustainable tourism be the solution to this problem? To get more on this, I'm joined by Michael Iacobides. He's in London. He's an economist, professor of strategy at London Business School, and an expert in ecosystems. Michael, great to have you with us on Across the Balkans.
Good to be with you.
I've read one of your articles where you say Greece is the victim of its own success. Why is there so much tourism to the point where it's changing some of the islands for the worse?
The problem, first of all, right now is that we're going into a period that people want to feel that they can socialize and explore new areas. We've been locked down for 2 years, and I think that's been quite a bit of time, plus quite a bit of the disposable income that people want to spend by going out. So it isn't strange that demand is picking up. And also, being on the other side of the Aegean, you know that the Mediterranean is a place that has a lot of attraction. And I think that Greece has been able to both get out of the crisis and reinvent itself, becoming attractive to tourists. Demand is not the main thing. The question is, what do you do with them? And I think that the concern is that if you don't plan properly and if you don't make the allowances for them, then you start having problems of over-tourism. And we have seen it in places that were very popular for tourists, places like Venice or like Amsterdam, where they realized that the quality of life of inhabitants is starting to be dented just because people want to go out and to explore the world. And also, don't forget, people want to be photographed. We're living in the generation that cares about Instagram and Facebook, which means that everyone wants to go to anything that's popular and anything that's photogenic. Greece, alas, has quite a bit of these.
Right, I'm actually going to Greece myself tonight, and I must say, yes, massive crowds, everything is booked, expected after 2 years being under lockdown and strict measures. Which areas or cities or islands, especially in the Balkans, do you think are affected the most?
Well, I think that anything that is easy to both share in terms of the social media and creates buzz is the victim of its own success. Think about what happened in the city of Dubrovnik after both you had one of the most popular series that was filmed there, and then there was a lot of excitement created, amplified by the cruise ships going on. In Greece, you see a huge influx of tourists in Santorini and in Mykonos. And unfortunately, what we see is that we do not create the infrastructures. So my concern, and that's where as a strategy professor, I'm a little bit puzzled by the lack of any broad action to compensate for that, is that we do not start creating both the infrastructure and the arrangements to manage that. In Greece, insult is being added to injury. So because we went in a period where all investments were deemed bad, the current government almost deems all investments to be good, even when they are privatizing public property and that they are irrevocably altering to the worse parts of the location. Islands like Ios, for instance, have been absolutely destroyed by just a couple of people who want to be private developers to do fancy things and line their pockets.
Right, and residents are extremely unhappy. We've seen that in our story from Mykonos. They said their island is completely changed. They can't even recognize it anymore, and they're asking for immediate action from the government. But what can they do at this point?
Well, I think that there's a number of things that they can do. And if you look throughout Europe, there is a growth of interest in managing over-tourism and starting with getting the tourist flows in some kind of order. I mean, in Santorini, there was even so much pressure in terms of the cruise boats that they needed to find ways of coordinating in order to manage the tourist flows. And I think that you need to start thinking about how the rules and regulations that we have in place are either solving the problem or making it worse. So, for instance, if you have a rule whereby big tourist investments, as opposed to being asked to develop the infrastructure that they will inevitably push on, sewages in Mykonos, the sewages were overflowing, or issues with telecommunications. In Greece, they're being given tax breaks and they're being given direct incentives because we simply call them strategic because they're big. This is not going to solve any problem. And I think that what we need to do is to start thinking much more carefully about how the shadow cost of tourism needs to be integrated in the way that we plan both our destinations and in the way that we set up the rules that exist. Private capital will go where private capital is going to be profitable. And I think it is up to the government to start taking some initiative to say, hey, we need to also protect the environment, but in Greece, even protect the ability of maintaining it as an attractive touristic destination.
Exactly. Michael, we had here on the program a mayor of Dubrovnik just recently. He said Dubrovnik will change its strategy. It will work more towards sustainable tourism following the pandemic. But what does that actually mean? And is this the future?
Well, the problem is that sustainability is a very nice buzzword to use, but unfortunately, there is very little discussion of what that means. So everyone wants to claim that they support sustainability, and then we don't see much action in terms of the implementation. In Greece, for instance, would there be a possibility of doing it? Yes. Are there types of tourism that are more sustainable? There are, for sure, but I think that we are undermining them. People who don't simply want to go and be photographed in the same beaches in Mykonos and Santorini, but people who go for ecotourism of various sorts, people who go walking and trekking, people who want to go bird watching, who coincidentally go throughout the year and as such leave more money in times of the year that you would not normally have tourists, and who are better for the economy, who are more interested in the local produce. The Tourism Association is already working to some extent, and they've created a blueprint which is on sustainable tourism. The tourism ministers have all professed their excitement about it, but it is proving very hard to see specific steps that are being taken. I mean, we've been trying to set up, for instance, one project in one of the Greek islands, Kea, which is not yet overrun by tourists, and are helping them set up this project of sustainable tourism. And it's taken a year and a half to have even an inch of progress, because I think that politicians love to speak about it, but I think that the reality is hard, and there's very little excitement in doing the hard yard.
Michael, is there a town or a city that you can say that they have a good strategy in Europe, strategy that actually works when it comes to this problem?
So first of all, you can see different cities that are starting to manage in different ways. As I mentioned, both Amsterdam and Venice have taken rather radical steps in terms of saying tourism is not the main objective in and of itself. So they have decided that they will manage the tourist flows. They are starting to impose greater levies on the cruise boats that are coming, which, by the way, quite often only bring hordes of people with very little cash. And you're like, well, why should we do that? Why should we not impose some rules that are a little bit more stringent on them? And they are creating programs that try to channel the tourists in other unknown places within the city. So I think that you see that bubbling at a city level, and I think that the more people understand that everyone is after an authentic experience, an authentic experience isn't just what you can share on Instagram that absolutely everyone else has done.
So what is the message? What is the message to all of us, ordinary people, how to prevent this? Go and explore some other areas sometimes. Is that the message?
It is the go and explore some other areas, but also get to have the opportunity of using tourism to understand how another place looks, as opposed to have your picture added to the thousands of people who take the same pictures in the same places. And I think that we're slowly getting there. And I hope that the message, including the message that you guys are giving by showing what is a practical reality, will help people make more thoughtful choices and push the governments to also impose more thoughtful rules, because that is, I think, something that we very much lack in the Mediterranean, and we can do much more and much better.
Michael, thank you so much for being our guest here on Across the Balkans and sharing your insight with us. Thanks again, Michael Yacobides there. Let's cross now to Brussels. Jennifer Iduch is there. She's the head of research at the European Travel Commission. Great to have you with us, Jennifer. We saw there in Fay's story just how big an impact excessive tourism has had on Mykonos and its natural beauty. Residents are outraged over how it's changing the infrastructure. They say they can't recognize the island anymore. How can this rapid and unplanned development be prevented?
Well, the impact of over-tourism is often harder on small islands simply because there is nowhere else people can go to. There is a limited space of land, there are limited resources, limited people in the island, and they normally on tourism. And although there is no immediate solution, some of the actions that could be carried out at the moment would be to promote off-season tourism, to develop all year round tourism experiences, also encouraging travelers to visit less touristic areas within the whole country. This will, of course, work if there is a strong and a solid transport infrastructure. And it's also crucial to educate travelers on how to travel and act responsibly, and investing also on digital technologies to better manage tourist flows. What could be done, for example, would be to install ticketing systems or applications to monitor crowd levels. And I would also add that adding or increasing tourism fees or taxes is also becoming a very common approach. We have, as an example, Venice. They will now be charging day tourists with a fee to address over-tourism. And nevertheless, this practice is something that, when it's implemented, it's important to let people know what the money is used for. So to preserve the natural beauty of a destination or allow for the restoration of some historical sites.
2 years of COVID have kept most visitors away from popular tourism spots in the EU and in the Balkans as well. But this summer we are seeing a record number of people return, but to some places in the Balkans, like Mykonos, like Santorini, like Dubrovnik. Will these increasing numbers put infrastructures under an even greater strain?
The truth is that European tourism will continue to grow in 2022. Of course, this is helped by the reopening of European destinations and the easing of travel restrictions. And after 2 years of not traveling, of travel restrictions due to the pandemic, people are now seriously willing to make up for the lost travel in the last couple of years. We're seeing travel demand growing faster than what the sector had expected. And this obviously comes with some concerns like overcrowding. We're also seeing massive labor shortages and strikes in the travel and tourism sector. Airports are understaffed and travelers are having to face flight delays, flight cancellations, or long security checks, and also piles of luggages. And even restaurants are finding it hard to fill vacancies. It's true that the 2 previous summers were well below 2019 levels, and at the moment there is an insufficient labor market that is required to deal with this fast-growing demand that we are all witnessing. And this is simply because the sector has not been able yet to recover the labor market that was laid off during the pandemic.
Right. Lots of problems for the European tourism. We are seeing that here in the region, in the Balkans as well. So what's the future of European tourism? And many are mentioning sustainable tourism. Is this a solution?
Well, actually, a future that does not have has in it a sustainable tourism model will not succeed in the long term. And achieving this sustainable growth means that the travel and tourism sector, the effect of it, needs to be able to balance the impact on the local economies, local communities, and also the environment. So basically, European tourism must be sustainable. It must be responsible and also regenerative. And all these principles are the ones that we have to follow to be able to achieve these goals. This also means that sustainability needs to be at the core of destinations' tourism strategies, so KPIs, and the way we define tourism success needs to be revisited. So do we want to focus on quality tourism over quantity tourism? And essentially, it is the future because tourism goes hand in hand with resilience and competitiveness. And it's actually by developing this sustainable tourism principles that destinations will be able to succeed, and it brings a lot of opportunities because while they are providing tourism products and services that are sustainable, they are also protecting the environment and preserving the natural resources and increasing the benefits for locals. Of course, success will not be possible if it's not accompanied by the implementation of digital infrastructures. And essentially, tourism is a force for good, and it should be therefore used as such.
And Jennifer, at the end, having in mind the pandemic, the war in Ukraine raging now here on the European soil, and all these challenges with the gas prices rising, can the European tourism recover from all this?
Well, the recovery of European tourism following the COVID-19 pandemic has brought significant change to the sector. It's true that reaching pre-pandemic levels seems to be the top priority of tourism destinations and tourism businesses at the moment. But there are other major aspects that should not be overlooked, like reducing the impact, the negative effects of travel and tourism on climate change, on residents' quality of life, or natural ecosystems and over tourism. This aspect should definitely not be ignored. The sector is recovering. Destinations should now aim at avoiding mistakes that were made in the past. And we now have an opportunity to target a more responsible and sustainable and innovative tourism in response to this exponential growth that we are seeing. And we should also take advantage we should basically leave behind traditional models and define now more ambitious goals to achieve this sustainable tourism growth that we want to have in the future.
Jennifer, great to have you with us. Jennifer Idu, they're head of research at the European Travel Commission. Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time from me and the whole team here in Istanbul. Bye-bye for now.